Most people are drafting the wrong running backs in fantasy football right now. I know this because I've been tracking where players are being drafted in over 100 drafts this summer. And in this video, I'll be telling you the 5 running backs you need to be drafting instead. And if you're not familiar, I'm Sal Vetri. I've helped people win their fantasy leagues for nearly 8 years now. And in this video, I plan to do the same for you. And let's talk about Bucky Irving to start here. First off, Bucky Irving, if you're not familiar right now, he's going as a top 20 overall player at the back of the second round on average. He's going after guys like Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Devon Achane at the running back position, as you can see on the screen right now. And if you're not already familiar, Bucky Irving last year, he broke out in a major way for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, especially around the second half of the season. Because as you can see right here on RotoViz's game splits tool, over his final 7 games after the Bucs bye week, Bucky Irving was averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game. And between his receiving yards right here of 29 and his rushing yards of 90 yards per game, this dude was averaging nearly 120 total yards per game, almost double the fantasy points in those final 7 games compared to his first 10. He was fantastic. And as you can see from my friend Austin over on Twitter, he says in Bucky Irving's 5 games where he saw at least 10 rush attempts, and I would assume he's going to see more than 5 games this year with at least double-digit rush attempts, he averaged over 20 fantasy points, 128 yards per game, and almost a touchdown per game. Nearly 21 fantasy points was like top 3 fantasy production when the dude just saw 10 rush attempts per game. I mean, give this guy more carries. Now that alone, that type of production alone when he got the volume, and in the second half of last year where he left off as a late round rookie, mind you, that alone is worth like a second round draft pick. But then you factor in that this dude put up over 1,500 total yards last year while not even playing 50% of the team snaps. Heck, he didn't even play 46% of his team snaps. And despite this, he still went out there and he was productive. Overall last year, Bucky Irving only played 45% of the snaps. He was just 37th in snap share, 34th in opportunity share, meaning the percentage of his team's backfield targets and carries that he saw. If you scroll over to his actual carries on the season, barely got into the top 20 with just 12.2 carries per game. I would assume, as most running backs who break out as rookies and show potential down the stretch, that he's only going to see more volume heading into year 2, or at least a decent amount more. Now, that doesn't mean that his 12.2 carries per game is now going to become 20, but maybe it becomes 14 or 15 carries per game, and his 3.1 targets becomes 3.7 or 3.8. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if you take that over a 17-game sample, well, now he's starting to see an extra 50 to 60 plus opportunities on the year, and that's massive. Now, the reason why he was able to put up over 1,500 total yards on limited snaps, less than 50%, is because he was extremely efficient. Check this out. Bucky finished top 10 in yards per touch, broken tackle rate, and yards created last year. And just a reminder, he was doing this as a rookie. Now, just in general, when we look at where he's currently going, is the 20th overall pick. Now, guys who go around him, yeah, I'd probably rather take Chase Brown later over him, but I want Bucky Irving over guys like Kyren Williams, over Breece Hall, and I even want him over Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor, who currently go ahead of him in fantasy drafts, and I think that's a mistake. Because coming off of that awesome rookie year, the competition doesn't change for Bucky Irving. It's still going to be the primary competition, Rachaad White, who don't just think like Rachaad White's not going to be involved. Sure, he hasn't been the most efficient runner, but he's still a very solid pass catching running back. One of the best that we've seen the last like 5 to 10 years come out of college in terms of what he was able to do as a pass catcher at Arizona State in college. There's still Sean Tucker there, who in his limited samples and when he got opportunities last year, including extended run, he had some massive performances on a per touch basis. But this looks like the Bucky Irving show. He's the most explosive. He's the most versatile. If you're talking about creating those explosive plays of 20 plus yards, Bucky's probably your guy in this backfield who will do it most. And the Bucs' own head coach Todd Bowles, as you can see on the Coach Speak Index right here on Twitter, a great account. Make sure you're following them, especially right now during training camp and preseason. All that stuff really matters and they're tracking it closely. He basically goes out and he says Bucky will be the guy coming in, as you can see right here, which is good to know. And he says Rachaad White will play a ton. As we were saying, he's a talented player still, but Bucky will be the guy coming in. That's a stamp of approval, and it makes sense. If you look at the second half of last year, he was the guy. They gave him key snaps in important games like a week 17 or week 18 playing game. In their postseason game as well, he was seeing a good amount of snaps and touches. It also helps that they were one of the best offensive lines last year, as you can see right here on Football Insights, on the top 3 right here in the NFL, the Eagles, the Broncos, and the Bucs in terms of projected offensive lines this year. I will say that this does not most likely take into account Tristan Wirfs' injury. He's currently on the PUP list. There's a good chance that he doesn't start the season 100% healthy or maybe even miss his time. Tristan Wirfs, the best offensive lineman on this team, one of the best offensive linemen in the NFL, so that's something to track closely. And when I was comparing him to, let's say, a guy like Josh Jacobs, who goes ahead of Bucky in more than 50% of fantasy drafts right now, well, Josh Jacobs, I'm taking Bucky probably like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 times in drafts for a couple of reasons. First off, Bucky Irving is 4 years younger. He's heading into his second year in the league when Josh Jacobs has had some massive seasons, including last year where he had over 330 touches. And if you do recall, the last time that Josh Jacobs had a massive workload back in 2022 when he was a fantasy darling, when he had 340 carries and over 1,600 rushing yards alone, well, the following season, season. He ended up dealing with injuries to close the year, and he wasn't as efficient. A career low 3.5 yards per carry, barely 800 rushing yards. Of course, that was on a bad Raiders offense where he dealt with injury later in the year and a bad offensive line. This is a totally different environment now on a new team with Matt LaFleur, creative offense, better offensive line, right? So we can't just say that that's automatically going to happen again, but we can say that Josh Jacobs is now another year older with a massive workload, and we hope no injury does happen here, but there's a chance that that happens when you're getting the younger, I would say more dynamic and explosive, especially in the short areas of the field, Bucky Irving, on what looks like just as good of an offense in terms of total points and offensive line play. I'll go ahead and I'll take Bucky Irving here, a guy who I think has a lot better chance if we're talking about a guy who maybe there's some games where he only sees 12 touches, but even in those, he has a chance to go for like 100 plus yards. So at the end of the day, the first running back right here, who is currently Josh Jacobs being drafted wrongfully ahead of Bucky Irving, in my opinion, I'd be taking Bucky Irving instead, and I'd also be taking this next rookie running back ahead of a veteran, and a lot of people aren't. And that rookie I would be taking is Omarion Hampton, because I think he's the real deal, and there's a pretty good chance now that he's going to lead this Chargers backfield, not only in touches in the season, but probably right away start to take over this backfield ahead of Najee Harris. Right now, Omarion Hampton goes in the 4th round of drafts. I think he's going to continue to skyrocket up this summer as Najee Harris continues to deal with the eye injury, and he's currently going, as I record this, after Alvin Kamara in fantasy drafts, and I think that's a mistake for a lot of reasons. First off, if you watch Omarion Hampton's film, whether you're watching highlights just like on TV or ideally the All 32, it's amazing. And that's basically backed up by what he did in college. Not only did he have 1,500 rushing yards back-to-back seasons, but last year in 2024 at UNC, right, with some different personnel there, with some different players on offense, he still was dominant. Over 1,600 rushing yards, almost 400 receiving yards. The dude put up over 2,000 total yards. He had a very impressive 11% target share at his age 21 season at UNC. Everything was clicking. I mean, this guy averaged 4.3 yards after contact. Like 4.3 yards per carry in the NFL is above average. It's like solid. You're getting almost 4.5 yards a carry. He was doing that after contact, right? That's insane. And then he went to the NFL Combine, and at 221 pounds, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a workhorse running back, not like a satellite back or a guy who's just like, you know, only a big running back and doesn't really have a lot of pass catching abilities or speed or anything like that. No, this is a 220-pound workhorse who has the solid red zone size, but then he also has the playmaking abilities. 4.46 speed is 94th percentile according to Player Profiler. 10% burst score when it comes to just his explosiveness, his jumps at the combine. That's fantastic. He checks literally every box from a production, a film, the landing spot in the first round with the Chargers, a run-heavy team, the athletic testing. Everything looks great. He's literally, for his size, one of the most athletic running backs we've ever seen, as Ryan Heath from Fantasy Points on Twitter, make sure to follow him, points out here. Out of all the running backs with a 95 or better SPARQ score since 2015 in his database, or maybe Fantasy Points, Saquon Barkley was number one. The only other guy to go over 95 out of 100 in terms of athleticism score was Omarion Hampton. That's the entire list. Saquon and Omarion Hampton. We're talking about big running backs who have elite size, freakish size plus speed. And like I said, he landed on the Chargers, where according to the team changes tracker, which is in my fantasy blueprint, you could check it out down below at jointheblueprint.com. Limited spots available for this year to help you with your, not only your draft, but your entire season, week to week, all year. Get access to me one-on-one as well. You can check it out right here. They lose J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. As of this recording, Dobbins is on the Broncos. Gus Edwards is not signed, which leaves over 300 opportunities in this backfield up for grabs. Now, the team did sign Najee Harris, but as we've been stating, Najee Harris right now is still battling an eye injury as of this recording. They've kind of just said at first that it wasn't a big deal, but if you're not at training camp for the first couple of weeks, it seems like a big deal. So in terms of who's going to see these 296 carries and 35 receptions, which is the workload left behind by Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, yeah, I think that there's probably going to be a good chance either way it was going to be Omarion Hampton, the first round pick in this Jim Harbaugh-led offense, or at least led team with Greg Roman on the offensive coordinator sticks. But Omarion Hampton now, if Najee Harris, who's new to this team, it's not like Najee's on the Steelers still and he knows the playbook and it's fine if he misses the first couple of weeks. He's new to this team. Najee needs to kind of get acclimated to the offense. He's not getting to do that right now, which makes me feel even better about Omarion Hampton week one coming out and seeing like 16 plus opportunities in this offense. And let's just be honest here. Najee Harris, he's known as the guy who every single season, if we pull it up right here, he goes out there and he goes for what? His rushing yards over 1,000 every single year. He plays every single game, so he's reliable in terms of he'll be out there, but it's not like he's averaging over 5 yards per carry. The guy's basically going to get you 4 yards per carry, not break off a lot of explosive plays. Like if we scroll down right here last season for Najee Harris, if we pull it up, the dude was only averaging 3.8 yards per carry, 47th in the NFL, 4.4 yards per touch, 39. So this is like average to well below average for a running back in Najee Harris, who only had 6 red zone touchdowns on 55 red zone touches last year. He's just not that efficient. And as we've been pointing out, now he's dealing with this eye injury, and Jim Harbaugh at the start of camp said that he doesn't even know if Najee will be back for training camp at all, which is a major concern, right? If you're not back for training camp, does that mean you're not going to participate at all for these couple of weeks of training camp? And does that mean that you're probably not, as a veteran now who's a little bit older, not going to play in the preseason? Maybe if you're healthy in time, you play like 1 or 2 drives. We're supposed to believe that that means you're not going to be rusty to start the year. I think the rookie who's now taking all the first team reps is going to be in a better situation. And then when you add on to this, that the Chargers offensive line, as you can see right here in terms of Ian Hartitz puts out PFF offensive line ranks from the end of 2024 through the preseason. So this takes into account all the NFL draft and free agency moves right here. You can see in the right column right here, the biggest improvements. The Bears are number 1, Minnesota's number 2, so the NFC North is up there. Number 3 is the Los Angeles Chargers in terms of most improved. And this also factors in like guys you lost from injury last year who are now coming back. They just gave Rashawn Slater the massive contract as well. So this looks like a great situation for a rookie to be running behind in a run-first offense with one of the most improved offensive lines. Why can't he handle 16 to 18 touches week 1? So basically everything for the rookie Omarion Hampton right now is trending up, right, as he enters his first year, while Alvin Kamara, I don't want to say everything's trending down because it's not, but relatively compared to Omarion Hampton, things are trending down for Alvin Kamara. If we pull it up right here, he's now entering his age 30 season. He just turned 30 years old. He had a groin injury to end last year. He's playing behind what is now, right now, currently ranked as a bottom 10 offensive line. If we pull up this chart right here, on some, you can see the Saints logo right here, bottom 10. It's down there with some really bad offensive lines like the Jaguars, like the Browns, right? In some sites, it's regarded as a bottom 5 offensive line. It's a situation where like his starting quarterback might be right now Tyler Shough, a rookie, might be Spencer Rattler. Not the greatest situation there from an offensive standpoint, which is why in terms of projected points this year from this tweet we've been referencing from Hayden Winks, you have to scroll all the way down here. Let's go all the way down to the New Orleans Saints, who are projected for the second fewest points per game this year. Just 18.4 points per game. The only team worse is the Browns right now, who don't know their quarterback situation either. So you're talking about an offense that might arguably be the worst offense in the NFL, might have one of the worst quarterback situations in the NFL, might have a middle of the pack at best offensive line, probably below average, not great. And then you think about Kamara, who, like we said, is 30. The last couple of years, he's kind of slowed down at the end of the seasons, and last year his efficiency wasn't the best. He ranked outside the top 40 running backs in yards after contact, broken tackle rate, drop rate, and overall RB efficiency. And I really like this tweet here from Ron Stewart. We've referenced it a couple of times. Be sure to follow Ron Stewart on Twitter. Over the last 3 years, Alvin Kamara from 2022 to 2024, he starts the seasons off hot. Before the injuries, before his offense falls apart, 20.3 fantasy points per game. He looks like one of the best running backs in fantasy. And then from weeks 10 on, so his 20 games, his final 3 seasons, the second half of the year, just 13.6 fantasy points per game. So he goes from like a top 5 fantasy running back to barely cracking into like your top 24 fantasy running backs. Part of it's because he's an older running back, maybe breaking down. Part of it's because his offenses just fall apart the second half of the year, but it's not like this offense looks any different. So when I'm looking at the situation right now, everything trending up for Omarion Hampton. Sure, there's some uncertainty because he's never played in the NFL, but that uncertainty usually leads to opportunity. Whereas Alvin Kamara in round 4, I liked him when he was in round 6. I thought he was okay when he was in round 5. Now as a 4th round pick, that's way too expensive compared to these guys, Kenneth Walker, Omarion Hampton, Chuba Hubbard, who all go after him. All right, now let's move on to another rookie running back. We're going from one rookie, a 1st round pick, to not a 1st round pick, but a good rookie in my opinion. And that man's name is Caleb Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers, a rookie running back who's getting lost in the shuffle, in my opinion, of like the Omarion Hamptons, especially lately, the Aston Genties, the Travion Hendersons, the Quinshon Junkins for bad reasons, all these guys, where honestly, Caleb Johnson might be the biggest wrecking ball of them all. That's probably Aston Genty, but he's right up there. And unlike Aston Genty, who goes as like a 1st round pick in most drafts, Caleb Johnson doesn't go into the 6th round of fantasy drafts. Probably in your league, he might not even go into the 7th round, which is just awesome because this dude is currently going in fantasy drafts right next to Aaron Jones. Like 50% of the time, people take Aaron Jones, and I think Aaron Jones is in a good offense. He's obviously in the past been an exciting player, but this year, if it's a 50-50 coins flip, I want Caleb Johnson almost every single time for many reasons. The first reason is, like I said earlier, the guy's a bowling ball, and we saw that last year at Iowa when the offense finally got going and they kind of just leaned on Caleb Johnson to be a workhorse. Not like the year before where he only had 117 carries. No, let's give him double that, 240. What does he do? Oh, he goes for over 1,500 yards and averages 6.4 yards per carry. He has the second most runs of 20 plus yards in college football. He has 23 touchdowns. His target share in a not pass first offense was 10.4%, which is nice. His breakaway runs of 20 plus yards, second in the league. Had the 4th most yards after contact. Everything looked good. The dude had over 1,000 yards after contact. That's Derrick Henry type stuff. And that's important because now he lands in an Arthur Smith offense that would love to run the ball 30 times per game in Pittsburgh. And Arthur Smith loves his bigger running backs, and that's exactly what Caleb Johnson is. In fact, Caleb Johnson is 6 foot, 224 pounds. Arthur Smith in the past has leaned on guys like Derrick Henry. Last year, Najee Harris. Heck, even in the past at times with the Falcons, Cordell Patterson at 220 plus pounds was getting the rock at the running back position because because he liked the bigger running back. And now when we pull up the Steelers offense, let's look at the backfield right now. Well, first off, right away, you see that Najee Harris is gone. We just talked about him being on the Chargers, and that's important because Najee Harris was a workhorse last year. Even though he wasn't efficient or all that flashy, he still had about 300 touches last year and way more opportunities than that when you factor in his targets, or a couple more opportunities that we should say. And now Najee Harris is gone, and let's not get it twisted. I like this tweet by Ryan Linkletter over on Twitter. He says, Najee's time in Pittsburgh was not flashy over the past few seasons, but he was a steady RB2 in fantasy. 1,000 plus yards every year like we talked about 12 fantasy points or more, average 255 touches per season, right? All of these things are amazing. And we're saying that for a guy who wasn't flashy, who wasn't overly efficient. And now you're getting Caleb Johnson, who pure runner-wise, and especially when it comes to breaking tackles, and he's younger entering his rookie year, is better than last year's version of Najee Harris, in my opinion. Which just means that if you're going to give 250 to 300 touches probably to the rookie and Caleb Johnson, he'll likely do more than Najee did last year when he had like 1,200 total yards. And if that's the case, in round 6, you're getting 1,400 yards. I like that. Now, sure, he's going to have to compete. I mean, they bring in Kenneth Gainwell this offseason, but he's going to have to compete with Jaylen Warren, who's not going to just like go away quietly. But Warren's never proven in the past, even when Najee was injured or inefficient, to take over a full workload. They even still split the backfield in past seasons with guys who were just not good at all when Najee Harris didn't miss time, but left a drive here or there, right? Najee never ended up missing any games. But if Najee left 2 drives, he got nicked up in a game, instead of giving Jaylen Warren like 70% of the snaps moving forward, he'd see like 50%, but then they just put in whoever else was available, which is not really a good sign that they trust Jaylen Warren. And then when you draft a workhorse in round 3 with Caleb Johnson, that probably would have gotten taken in round 2 if they had that pick. They traded their pick to the Seahawks for DK Metcalf. I think Caleb Johnson looks like a clear-cut starter right away right now. You might see some camp reports like, oh, Jaylen Warren's running with the runs, but so is Caleb Johnson. He might be going after Warren in the rotation, but that's just at the start of training camp. The fact that Caleb Johnson is a 3rd-round pick is already from day 1 of training camp getting first-team reps, that's important. So now we have to start to compare this to Aaron Jones, who, like I said, he's going right now right next to, in terms of RB rankings, Caleb Johnson. About 50% of the time they're drafting each of these guys. And in terms of Aaron Jones, like, I don't want to say a lot of bad things because the guy just turned 30 years old this past December, I believe. He had a great season last year while being 29 and 30 later on in the year. I mean, he's coming off of a season where last year Aaron Jones went out there and did stuff that we don't normally see him do. 255 carries, we don't normally see him do that. 306 total touches, the most of his career, and this guy was still productive. Productive to the point where he had over 1,100 rushing yards and over 400 receiving yards. Like one of the quietest 1,500 yard seasons you'll ever see. 50 receptions as well at the running back position, and he was just kind of like an afterthought in this offense. He was leaving some games early with injury. Obviously, Justin Jefferson will be stealing the attention, and Sam Darnold in terms of national headlines, but Aaron Jones was productive. So I don't want to say I'm out on Aaron Jones by any means, because depending on the draft, I do like taking him, especially if Caleb Johnson's already gone in this range of drafts, but I want Caleb Johnson instead because Aaron Jones right now, he does have competition. Jordan Mason is great. You saw it last year when he got 50% of the snaps, he had over 106 rushing yards per game. And now he goes from a good 49ers offense to a good Vikings offense with one of the most improved offensive lines. We showed you that chart earlier in terms of improved offensive lines. Number 1, Chicago, tied for number 2 with the Chargers that we mentioned earlier, the Minnesota Vikings. And this is still an offense that has a ton of other playmakers. Obviously, Justin Jefferson. Now you're going to get a full season health out of TJ Hawkinson. Jordan Addison might be suspended 2 to 3 games, but once he's back, the passing game might be taking over a little bit more than the running game. At least relative to what we're going to see in Pittsburgh with a nearly 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers, I think they're just going to do what Arthur Smith wants to do and lean on the run, play action passing to DK Metcalf, lean on the run, lean on the run, lean on the run, which should lead to an easy 250 carries or so for Caleb Johnson. Like last year was a career year for Aaron Jones, and he left like 4 to 5 games early with some injuries, never missed a complete game, but he left games early, and that was just 255 carries. I don't think they're going to give that to him again. In fact, this offseason, multiple times they've called Jordan Mason the 1B, getting the short yardage touches, keeping Aaron Jones fresh. These are direct quotes from the head coach and Kevin O'Connell and some of the general managers out there as well in Minnesota. So like this is a situation where I think Jordan Mason is going to be more involved in the offense in terms of taking away key touches in the red zone than Jaylen Warren will compared to Caleb Johnson. So when these guys are both going in the 6th round, I think a lot of people right now are making the mistake and taking the name that they know and the name that produced last year in Aaron Jones, who's now turning 30, which historically age 30 and 32 seasons for running backs usually see a production cliff. I don't feel good about Aaron Jones coming off of a career high touches. I'd rather just take the younger rookie who I think's right now a more explosive pure runner. Now this next one is going to be a massive debate because both these guys go in the 1st round of fantasy drafts. So either way, it's going to be a good pick, but one of them might help you win leagues more than the other. That's what happened last year. And this takes us to the guys up top. Right now, Bijan Robinson and Saquon Barkley on average go as the number 1 and number 2 running back in fantasy drafts. It flipped. It used to be Saquon going before Bijan. Now, as of this recording in August, it is Bijan going before Saquon Barkley. And I just have to say, I disagree with this. Now, don't get me wrong. Like I said, Bijan Robinson was great. I mean, the second half of last year when he took over as the RB1, he had the most fantasy points per game ahead of Saquon Barkley. But that was the second half. It wasn't all season when Saquon was the RB1. Because let's not get it twisted. Saquon Barkley led the NFL last year. year. Let's just pull up every single stat that he did last year. He led the NFL in carries, right? A lot of that has to do with his team's rushing plays per game. Also led the NFL behind the #1 ranked offensive line. Oh yeah, in terms of production, you all know what he did. He threatened for the overall rushing record with over 2,000 rushing yards. In terms of breakaway runs of 10 plus yards, he had those. 20 plus yards, he had those. 15 total touchdowns. He had 5 games of 30 plus fantasy points. The only running back and player to do that last year. He was obviously the league winner that everybody needed. I mean, every single metric that you look at, you're going to see Saquon Barkley up there. In terms of explosive run rate last year in 2024, in terms of how often you touched the ball and got a 10 plus yard play, we know that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be up there. He's explosive. Of course, Derrick Henry as well. Number 3 was Saquon Barkley on that list. I talked about all these explosive runs that he had of 10 plus and 20 plus yards. Look at this right here. Saquon Barkley had the most runs last year of 10 plus yards, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. It doesn't matter. You know all those runs, and a couple of them where he slid down and didn't get the extra 10 to 15 plus yards to score a touchdown because he's just a team player. He could have had even better fantasy season. Now, Saquon Barkley was top 5 in all these areas, and a lot of that had to do with his team, the Eagles. As you can see right here, 621 rush attempts led the NFL. Their rushing yards per game was second. 5.9 yards per carry was second. Like, they were just so efficient, and I think the same thing's going to happen this year. But let's not get it twisted. The Atlanta Falcons last year were also top 10 in terms of rush attempts per game. They also had a top offensive line in the NFL, or one of the better ones in the NFL. This should still be a team with Zach Robinson entering year 2, who was a crafty play caller and creative last year. That's still going to be a threat to have a strong offense. So the debate between these two guys is legit. I mean, it's extremely close. There's obviously the argument that Bijan Robinson is a couple of years younger and not coming off of his probably career season like Saquon just did. So there's still a chance that Bijan could have that next year. But there is also the argument that Saquon Barkley is coming off of a year where he looked healthy, #1 offensive line, #1 rush offense, and there's really not much reason to think that's going to change this year. It still looks like the Eagles with the best offensive line, and Saquon, who did not get broken down at any point all the way into the Super Bowl last year, he looked fresh. But when it comes to Bijan Robinson, there is just one small thing, and this is what we're talking about. We're talking about just the smallest differences when you're talking about like the #1 and #2 running back, and maybe even #1 and #2 overall player in terms of certain drafts this year. When we look at it, the biggest difference for me between these guys is this right here, the competition. Bijan Robinson's competition is Tyler Algier, who's not a pushover. As a rookie, late round rookie, he set the Falcons record for rushing yards. He went over 1,000 rushing yards. Last year, in games where Bijan Robinson was active, we still saw some contests where Tyler Algier was putting up points. There was one game where he went for 18 carries, over 100 yards and a touchdown with Bijan active. Now, you can look at the splits and see over the second half of the season that Tyler Algier was not nearly as involved, and Bijan started to take over, and we would assume that that's only going to continue into this year. But there's also been weeks where out of nowhere, Tyler Algier sees a dozen touches, sees 14 or 15 touches. They're using him more in the fourth quarter. They're using him more maybe in the red zone than you would like to see. Whereas with Saquon, that's not a concern at all. So I get it. There's going to be people who point to the fact that Saquon had almost 500 total touches with the playoffs last year and say, oh, guys who have this many touches, and they'll pick, right? You see this all over fantasy Twitter and like in other areas, podcasts, whatever. They'll say, oh, like these 5 running backs who have had 450 touches, the next year they end up as the RB, whatever. Well, yes, that's just the law of averages, right? You have your #1 season ever if your team's giving you almost 500 touches. Obviously, the next year you're probably going to come down a little bit, but you're not drafting Saquon Barkley this highly to finish as the RB1 overall. You hope that he does. You're drafting him for his insanely high floor that is like probably at least a top 10 running back, probably closer to a top 5 running back. That's why you're taking him this high. His floor is insanely high and his ceiling is high. It's not just trying to draft him to finish RB1 overall. If you take Saquon with your first overall pick and he finishes as the RB2, that's still great. Now, if you want to see exactly where I have Saquon and Bijan and all my other top 50 overall players ranked this year, you can completely free. It's linked down below in the description, or you can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. That is fantasyrankingsfree.com. That'll take you to this page where you enter your email, and then I'll instantly send you the top 50 rankings. If for some reason you don't get them, be sure to check your spam and promotional folders. They probably went to there, and that will send you my top 50 overall rankings, showing you the best and worst picks in every single range, highlighted in green or red and tier. But as always, if you're a serious fantasy player and you want my full top 250 rankings, all my other draft tools and in-season tools, that's exactly why I built my fantasy blueprint. It's what I use in all my leagues the past couple of years, and over 10,000 people are currently using in their leagues this year. You can use the link in the description below or go to jointheblueprint.com to learn more about the fantasy blueprint and what you get right here. You could see a bunch of stuff on this page, including a lot of reviews from people who used the blueprint last year, are using it this year, and are now back. Over 85% of people are returning, which I think is just the best stat in general. 85% of people who used it last year are now back for this year, which just kind of shows you if almost 9 out of 10 people like the last year to come back, it's probably a good tool. So you can check it out with the link in the description below, or head to jointheblueprint.com. Just to let you know, there are limited spots available this year. Now that it's August, they are filling up very quick. So if you want in, now's the time. Now, the next running back situation I want to talk about has to do with the rookie, another rookie, second round rookie for the New England Patriots, and TreVeyon Henderson, because if we look at where he currently goes in fantasy drafts, he's going as a 6th round pick. I love that. But he's going after David Montgomery. And this just seems like a mistake. And we've talked about this exact same scenario in the past, but now it's been a month since then, and I thought David Montgomery would start to fall and TreVeyon Henderson would start to rise, especially since Henderson is getting raving reviews in training camp, but that's not the case right now, and I think that's a massive mistake. Henderson, in my opinion, kind of reading between the lines in training camp, looks like one of their most explosive players already for the Patriots, which if he's already one of the most explosive players on offense, it probably means that he might be or is pretty much already the most explosive running back in this backfield. If we just look at the eye test, yeah, Henderson between him and Ramondre, definitely more explosive. Between him and Antonio Gibson coming out of college a couple years ago might have been a debate, but now with Gibson, yeah, in terms of the age difference, I'm still going to give it to Henderson. I would say he's probably the best overall player in this backfield as well. A stat that I love referencing this offseason from my friend Austin over on Twitter again, it says that Henderson was the only running back last year, if you see right here, in this 2025 class for college football, it hit 1,000 rushing yards, 200 receiving yards, and 7 yards per carry. The dude averaged over 7 yards per carry. If we look at how reliable he was, which is not something you could say about Antonio Gibson or Ramondre Stevenson's ball security last year, according to Carlos Lopez on Twitter, the last 2 seasons for TreVeyon Henderson, 300 rush attempts, 0 fumbles, 53 targets, 2 drops. The dude had 0 fumbles on 667 career touches in college. That's insane. He also, as a running back, was averaging 10.5 yards per reception, which just shows his ability to produce both downfield and after the catch. 10.5 yards per reception is what slot receivers, they're not even doing that in the NFL, and this guy out of the backfield was last year. Then he goes to the NFL Combine, and a couple of things here. First off, he ended up weighing over the 199 pounds, right? He got to 202 pounds, but since it goes over 200 pounds, nobody's going to start crying about size, right? It's kind of funny, just that threshold. But you can see here, he runs the 4.43 40, 81st percentile speed, 91st percentile burst. We know that he has the burst. We know all these things, which is exactly why the Patriots took him in the second round for what likely will be skewing maybe a little bit run heavy under Mike Vrabel, under Josh McDaniels, especially when you're investing in your offensive line and the running back position in the draft. Teams only show their hand twice a year, free agency in the draft, when they have to take their wallets out. And in the draft this year, you get Will Campbell in the first round, TreVeyon Henderson in the second round. Okay, so that kind of tells us some stuff. Jared Wilson as well as center in the third round. In free agency, they improved the wide receivers with Stefon Diggs, but also getting Garrett Bradbury, also getting Morgan Moses on the offensive line. So trying to improve the offensive line and the run game was a priority this offseason. And like we mentioned with this backfield, when you're talking about Ramondre and Antonio Gibson being the biggest threats, yeah, sure, maybe to start the year, the veteran Ramondre is who these veteran coaches in Vrabel and Josh McDaniels trust a little bit more. But honestly, by the time the season starts, right away, I think TreVeyon Henderson week 1 probably sees like what Jahmyr Gibbs saw in his rookie year. Remember Jahmyr Gibbs' rookie year Thursday night football game against the Chiefs? I think he saw like 12 or 14 touches and people were panicking, but he put up like 80 total yards. He averaged like 5 to 6 yards per touch. Like it was fine, but he didn't see 20 touches. I think you could see that same thing this year, week 1. 12 to 14 touches for Henderson. He has a couple of explosive plays. He's averaging 5 yards per touch, but doesn't find the end zone. And people are concerned because he only gets them 10 to 12 fantasy points in week 1 without a touchdown. That's a good total, and it's only going to get better from there. I think the dude's already the best runner, the best pass catcher, definitely the best blocker in this backfield for sure, in terms of ball security as well. I think he's a 3-down back that could end up being the workhorse for this team by like week 4. And by workhorse, I don't mean 24 touches a game. No, at 202 pounds, he's not built like that. I'm talking about like Bucky Irving last year. You might get 16 touches a game that are highly efficient and explosive, and then you start to earn some red zone work. So when I see him next to guys like David Montgomery, who literally needs to finish as a 5th round running back or better, the dude's gonna have to score 10 to 12 touchdowns because he's not that involved as a pass catcher. He's not that explosive, especially based on his age right now and just what we've seen the past couple years. You're gonna have to get these touchdowns out of David Montgomery, but that's my concern with David Montgomery. Will the touchdowns be there? I mean, last season, if we look at it, first of all, he only played last year 42% of the snaps. Okay, so he only played 42% of the snaps last year. That's not great. Relied heavily last season. Top 5 in the NFL in terms of how much of his fantasy points relied on touchdowns. If we pull it up right here, 12 touchdowns last year for him, finished as a top 20 back. He relied heavily on touchdowns. And now the guy's coming off of an injury where he tore the MCL to end last year. And when he did that, Jahmyr Gibbs went out there in those 3 games, as you can see right here. The dude averaged over 32 fantasy points per game. Between his receiving and rushing yards, over 160 total yards per game. 32 fantasy points per game is insane, was the RB1 during that time. Now, Monty did come back for the playoffs, but immediately got out-touched by Gibbs again. Now there's a worse offensive line. 2 guys are gone in Kevin Zeitler, and then they also lost Frank Ragnow to retirement. Another guy's on the PUP list in training camp. And you lose Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator that helped this offense in general. With a new offensive coordinator coming in, although it's an in-house hire, you might see just less touches to David Montgomery, and they say, oh, the stuff we got out of Jahmyr Gibbs to end last year, why don't we just do more of that? It's also worth pointing out that David Montgomery and the Lions have the second hardest strength of schedule right now. So in terms of the touchdown-dependent David Montgomery, or the guy who's just going to be able to create yards and plays and explosives and touchdowns on his own, and TreVeyon Henderson in an ascending offense, in my opinion, led by Drake May, I like that a little bit more. In these rounds of the drafts, the first 5 rounds, maybe the first 6, go for a liability if you want, take some upside shots, but then once you start to get to this range, like round 6, I just want to start to take these running backs in this range of the draft who have upside. Sure, RJ Harvey has upside. TreVeyon Henderson has upside. You scroll down, we talked about Caleb Johnson's upside. You keep scrolling down, right? You start to get to this range of round 9 where Jordan Mason has some upside as well, right? I just don't want to be taking the Travis Etiennes, the Tyron Tracy's, these guys, Tony Pollards of the world, where I kind of know what their upside is, and that's if everything goes right. I feel the same way about David Montgomery. The dude needs another dozen touchdowns this year for the 3rd straight season to probably be worth it for you. I don't want that. So those are 5 running backs I'd be taking instead of the guys who are currently going at or before them, where most fantasy players are just making that mistake instead this year. Now, just a reminder, if you do want my free top 50 overall rankings, make sure to get them right now in the description at fantasyrankingsfree.com. You can head to fantasyrankingsfree.com. So you want to be targeting these running backs in fantasy drafts, but if you want to see the 10 players who over the past month have been skyrocketing up my draft board because of training camp reports, because of more opportunity coming their way, you can check out them right here. And there's a lot of dark horses in this video, so make sure you watch it because your league mates probably won't.